Muntons Malt PLC.
Hi David.
Hi, and Tom Mellor, who is also obviously a co-founder of the Spirit of Yorkshire and farmer and producer of all our malting barley. So we thought it was going to be a really good session talking about malt, and we all understand that we're drinking malt whisky nowadays, but what is malt? So we're going to look into how we go about producing malt and Tim's daily sort of routines, if you like. We're also going to talk to Tom about how he grows the barley and how he produces the quality we need to get into that bottle in front of us. So Tim, if you want to introduce yourself, what do you do on a daily basis and what do you do at Muntons?
Okay, thank you David. Tim Wakely, General Manager, Flamborough Maltings, Muntons PLC. So Muntons are a producer of malt and malt products in the UK. We produce about 200,000 tonnes of malt, our two maltings in Suffolk, and more locally in Bridlington, where we've been supplying Tom and David with malt for World Top Brewery and Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery for just over 10 years now. At Bridlington we produce about 102,000 tonnes a year of malt in a normal year, and malt is basically the product of the malting process, which is where you take malting barley and convert all of the natural resources inside the barley into something that's usable in a mash tun to make a sweet work for the brewing process or the distilling process after that as well. That is all that we do in our Flamborough site. We just make malt from malting barley, one ingredient, a bit of water, or quite a lot of water, bit of heat and power, and if everything's done correctly, after about 8 days of processing we get a mashable sample of malt.
Okay, so it's quite a complex thing, which we'll probably go into a bit more detail as we go through the chat. But obviously, Tim's got nothing to malt unless he's got the barley. So, Tom, you're in charge of growing the crop, and we're actually right in the middle of harvest at the moment. So, where are we at, and how's it performing?
Okay, well, just by way of introduction, I'm sure many of you will know who have seen me before on maybe some of these workshops, but I'm Tom Mellor, co-founder of the Spirit of Yorkshire and also the World Top Brewery as well, but I'm also a third-generation farmer, and we've been farming at Hungerby Grange since 1945, and one of the predominant crops that we grow is malting barley. The Yorkshire wolds are calcareous, chalky hills with quite thin soils on and quite drought prone and very, very suited to growing malting barley, which I guess is why Muntons set their plant up in Bridlington, right on the edge of the Yorkshire wolds, and also, there is another one just outside Malton as well, to the west of us. Growing malting barley requires quite a lot of skill. We have to make a decision as to whether we grow winter barley or spring barley, and I'll explain the difference between the two a little later on. But effectively, we can't make good beer and we can't make good whiskey if we don't have good malt, and we can't have good malt if we don't grow and produce proper, good quality barley. So it starts with the farm, and it starts with it starts with the soil, and it starts with the variety of the barley as well, and then it's up to us to do everything that we can, working with the weather and with the ingredients that we've got to make a decent crop of barley.
And where are we at exactly now then, Tom, in harvest terms?
Interestingly, we are midway. We've just started the harvest in this part of the world. The winter barley, which is sown in the autumn, ripens probably about 3 to 4 weeks earlier than the spring varieties, which are then sown anywhere from mid-February, depending on the conditions, anywhere to April. The winter barley has been harvested now. We harvested ours last week on Friday and Saturday. We had just over 21 hectares of winter barley, which is about 52 acres in old money. And the variety we used was a variety called S.Y. Vessel, and it's the first time we've actually grown a winter malting barley for about 10 years. And probably Tim can tell you a little bit more about that particular variety and why we have decided to grow it this year. So I'm going to pass that over for a minute.
Yeah, so the variety in question, Vessel, it's a new opportunity for farmers, distillers, brewers and maltsters as well. And traditionally, distillers in particular have only been taking spring barleys for their malt, and the particular reason for that is a characteristic of the barley that is expressed, which is called GM. And spring barleys are totally free from GM, whereas winter barleys tend to have GM, and we don't really want GM glycosidic nitrile in the process. But plant breeding, as always, is innovative and looking for new things, and one thing that we've been trying to do is get low GM winter barley varieties, because agronomically a winter barley variety that can be grown consistently in good qualities in places like the Yorkshire Wolds would be quite an attractive thing in the distilling trade, and they seem to have cracked it with Vessel. So you've got all of the advantages of winter barleys in your distilling malt, and those advantages being it's risk of crop failure. That's one big thing. So having a winter barley that you can make into distilling is good if spring barley is not very good. And then also different agronomic practices as well. It spreads out the labour load throughout the year. And it can also increase yield on the farm as well, net, when you compare it to a spring barley. So an attractive proposition from farmers. And yeah, Vessel seems to be gaining a little bit of traction as well. So we know that Tom's got this material which we're going to malt for him, and also we have some other growers in other parts of the Yorkshire Wolds that are also trialling this variety. So it's quite an exciting innovation for our industry.
Yeah, and this will be the first time we've had it through your plant. So
absolutely, yeah. So yeah, we're really looking forward to putting that through and seeing the sample that Tom's provided today. It looks like more good quality world top barley. So something to look forward to seeing the results in January, February time.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of what we've got here, Tom, isn't it? That we can try different things, because we are very unique in the fact that we're a field to bottle producer, which gives us full traceability and control over one of the most important raw materials.
Absolutely, we know exactly the seed lot numbers from the seed that we put into the ground. We know the date that it was sown. We know all the applications of either nitrogen or fungicides to keep the leaf clean. We know exactly what's gone on there. We have full control over that, and we also have full control over how the barley is planted, in terms of whether it's conventionally put in with a drill having been ploughed, or whether, as we'll probably talk about maybe a little bit later on, perhaps in another workshop, whether we're using non-inversion techniques to try and reduce the carbon footprint and actually sequester carbon from the air, but also to stop nitrates being mineralised and then being washed through into the water supply before they've had a chance to be used by the plant and the crop. So there's all those sort of things that are going on, and we have complete control over them. And actually, just as an aside, we did after a very, very brief discussion a couple of years ago when Joe and David asked whether we could grow any rye on the farm. We did a little bit of investigating, and we grew some rye. Muntons then malted it for us, and then we produced a rye spirit, didn't we?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
we've got the ability to change. We've also got the ability to be very, very nimble and flexible, and so we're open and receptive to new ideas, and as well as which will then sort of complement our core new make spirit.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say as well that a lot of people who contact us, that's one of the biggest things they want to talk about, because it is pretty unique in the industry. There's probably only a handful of people who can say they use 100% of their own barley.
Well, I think that's right, and the other thing it does is it gives you a really good insight into above and below the supply chain. So from our point of view, we get to know what's happening in the malting world. The maltsters also get to know what's happening in our world as well, from a farming point of view. But also the brewers and distillers get to know as well how, the various different issues and potential problems and potential, I'll call them issues again, for want of a better word, that get thrown up every single season with with the weather and the particular disease pressure from the growing conditions.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say every season's different. So, you might sow the same variety in the same field the year after, and the crop could be completely different because of what's happened during the season.
Oh, well, indeed, and if you get a dry spell in the spring, for example, and the crop doesn't tiller correctly, then you are left with a plant that doesn't have enough stalks on it effectively, and then when it does take in the nutrients, when the rain arrives, I think this happened as far as we're concerned with Maris Otter in 2011, which is why we don't grow it anymore. All the nitrogen and all the nutrients went into the single head and rendered it to useless for brewing. Really.
Yeah. So we are in the laps of the gods sometimes. Very much so.
We have to work with the elements, not against them.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're trying to work through that.
So I guess when obviously the crop's been harvested, it's the winter one, as we just said, it's now in the shed. How long will it be before it goes down to Tim and Tim do his magic, as it were?
Well, what tends to happen is that we will dry that and make sure that that's down at 14.5% moisture, and then we will hold that until, I think, Tim, we normally send our barley in around about sort of late October, early November, don't we? You then work your magic on it.
We dry it again.
Well, you ring fence it, don't you? And then you dry it again, and then let it rest, and then probably over to you, really.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Let's say, so obviously provenance is such a big thing with the work that we do with Tom and David. So when we've got the bulk of harvest in, we get Tom's barley down, we dry it again down to about 12% moisture content, because that aids processing further on, and also gives it some strong sort of physical stimuli to biochemistry that's going on within the grains themselves as well. So when we get it down to the Maltons, it's all segregated and then left to rest after drying for about 3 months there or thereabouts, and we're constantly monitoring the condition of the grain during that point for temperature and also recovery from dormancy. And this is a bit more of a thing for winter barleys than spring barleys, but not a huge issue. And it's just that there's always a bit of reticence to grow from the barley straight after harvest. So giving it a good dry down to 12% moisture content just sets the clock running, and after 3 months it should be growing really vigorously when we expose it to watch. And when I say vigorously, we're working to standards much higher than a packet of seeds you get from the garden centre, for instance. So they need to be 90% viable. We need 98% viability within 48 hours of seed and water. So really strict from that point.
So effectively you're taking that inert seed and trying to make it grow again to change its modified its innards or starch. Or,
absolutely. So the process of growing is literally using that natural process where the seed starts to liberate all its natural goodness to power the future growth of another barley plant to make more barley. And we're trying to hijack that process and get it to a certain point and then stop it. I mean, the chemicals we're particularly interested in, not chemicals but constituents we're particularly interested in, are carbohydrates, which directly drive alcohol yield from barley or malt, and also proteins as well, which we need to turn into enzymes. And then if we're making distilling malts, it's all about just enzymic activity. But then in brewing malts as well, we're looking to provide amino acids that can contribute to flavour and also to mouthfeel as well. So some of your sort of full-bodied lagers and ales will have quite a lot of free protein in there to help with head retention and general mouthfeel as well. But whereas distilling is just about carbohydrates.
So going back then, how did people realise that forcing it to grow again would release more sugars to produce more alcohol? Do you think? Would you think that was something that would just, the fell across, a bit like making glass, it just happened and they thought that works?
A little bit less of an accident than an accident in making glass, I think. And, depending on which textbook you read. I mean, in my mind's eye, there was somebody in Egypt with a pile of grain that accidentally got wet.
Right.
But for some reason stopped at a certain level of wetness and then got dry again and then got infected by yeast.
Okay.
And they were probably quite hungry at that point and ate what was there, regardless of the fact that it would maybe be a little bit spoiled, but then found the mildly intoxicating effect to be desirable. That sort of observational stuff there.
So it's a completely natural thing, that's the point. It could happen.
Absolutely, but then if you look at brewing and well, brewing in particular around the world. There's people brewing in so many different ways, and all these ways have evolved naturally. I've seen people on television chopping sago palms down, stamping on the inside of the trunk, spitting on it a bit, running up and down in it, and then after 2 weeks they drink the liquor that comes out, and they all get.
Well, it's a bit like the Dungeon pits for making rum. I mean, completely naturally produced alcohol, really.
Spontaneous. Lambic beers as well, where natural draft and airborne yeasts spontaneously start the fermentation, and then there's always somebody who thinks they can do it a little bit better, and then the process of refinement starts.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you start with a natural process, and then you gradually hone it and hone it and hone it, and then you start to investigate the science behind it all, and that's where we've got to now.
Absolutely,
thousands of years of research and development in it.
You look at all the different streams that have come together. We talked about agronomy, we talked about malting, we talked about brewing, we talked about distilling. All engineering, everything comes together to keep driving things forwards. And Tom's a third generation farmer, as he's told us, but Tom's grandfather would probably be delighted to get a ton and a quarter of spring barley an acre.
He would have absolutely been chuffed to bits. I can remember that the Holy Grail was getting 2 tons an acre.
Yeah.
We'd be very disappointed now if we didn't get 3.5.
Well, that's even be allowed in the pub on a Sunday night, would you?
Well, yeah, we all know that the yields go up as the pints go down.
That's
no question about that.
But I mean, Vessel, it's got the potential. Maybe not quite on wool land, but on slightly land that's a little bit more full-bodied. It'll do 4 tons an acre, and that's a result of the agricultural revolution, isn't it?
You didn't tell me that when you sold me the seed.
Oh, sorry, 5 tons an acre with a tailwind. But everything keeps improving from that point of view. In barley, we've got a particularly good candidate for the brewing process. It grows well in our climate, and that's the belt that runs all the way across the north of Europe, basically, where brewing as we know it evolved. So pilsners and ales and all that sort of thing. And it's got just the right blend of protein and carbohydrate, because if either of those are a little bit off kilter, you get something totally different. So, for instance, a really low nitrogen spring barley is perfect for distilling malt, but not much good for making a nice lager. Yeah. And so it's getting that balance just right. And with the local farming expertise and the right varieties, you can tailor that perfectly to get exactly what you want. It's just got that right blend of enzymes, proteins, and carbohydrates.
Yeah, and so really from possibly an accident all those years ago, we've now refined it to a very
absolutely
precise science, which is really important.
The march of progress, if for every acre of farmland that was traditionally put down to a cereal to brew with, I'm guessing you'd probably get, let's say for argument's sake, 1,000 pints of beer or 10 bottles of whiskey, and that benchmark now, I could do the sums and work it out, but it's several magnitudes greater than that.
You don't have them to hand then?
Not to hand, just a minute. Well, it's 10,000 pints of beer from a ton of malt, which is 1.25 tons of barley, which is about a third of an acre, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and is it 100 bottles of cask strength whiskey from a ton of malt? I think something like that.
Wow.
Well, 400 litres of pure alcohol from a ton of malt.
Yeah, of course.
So so that's a ton and a quarter of barley. So
works backwards from.
Yeah.
Backwards from
So
that.
about 1,200 litres of pure alcohol from an acre of barley.
Yeah, and back to your grandfather's day, it would be a lot less than that. That march of progress.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, physically then, that hits your site. What do you do with it?
So we've got the barley bit. So we dry it to 12% and dress it as well. So small grains in a barley sample can drive uneven performance in the maltings because they tend to take up water at different rates. And if you just go back to the bit I said about 98% germination after 48 hours, we can't tolerate any variance in that. So if something strikes up 3 or 4 hours later, that's a minor perturbation in our process that we'd rather not tolerate. So we take out the smaller grains, which typically in a sample of barley, and this sample in particular, will be about 3% of the volume or weight that's in there. We also take out any impurities as well, so any little bits of dust and calf and tweaks and things that may have dropped into the combine header in the field, that sort of thing. So we've got a really nice, dry, clean, uniform sample of barley that we can then lay down in storage for 3 months. After that 3-month period, if we've tested the barley and found that it's all okay to grow, we then start ordering it up into the maltings to be steeped. So the steeping process is about hydrating it, taking the moisture content from about 12% to approximately 40 to 42%, depending on what you're trying to achieve with the malt in the end. But yeah, 48 hours, roughly speaking, in the germination, in the steeping process, with 2 or 3 immersions in water to get that moisture content, and then we move it across to the germination vessels, which nominally we've got 4 days of processing time then. And because the barley is actively growing at that point, it's starting to liberate all those natural resources that are in there, the starches, the proteins, and we've got this progression of enzymic activity which starts to break down the protein walls and the protein structure of the endosperm, and we're generating all the starch breakdown enzymes as well. And after about 4 days we should be, give or take, where we need to be with the right sort of makeup of enzymes and starch degradation at that point. We just then need to keep it safe. Malt that's at 42% moisture content will last about 12 hours without any ventilation on it. So we take it all the way down to, well, for a distilling malt, just under 5% moisture content. If it's a brewing malt, an ale malt, we tend to take it down a little bit lower as well, because in that kilning process we need to impart a little bit of colour and flavour. Obviously for distilling malt it's quite a light sort of colour. With your very heavily coloured ale malts, it's quite a dark colour, so quite aggressive, killing with higher temperatures at the end. But at that point, all that needs to be done is we take off the roots and shoots, which brewers and distillers can't use, and then we end up with a finished product, which is something like what we see in this glass here. So that's just a nicely packaged
energy source energy. Yeah,
it doesn't look very different. It doesn't actually look very different to the barley to the naked eye, but actually what's inside it is completely different. Yeah.
So that's all macromolecules, and that's all molecules. They're the breakdown parts of it. So with little provocation from a brewer, that will the malt will shatter really quickly and easily to make quite a nice, consistent, fine dust.
So if I could put this into sort of layman's terms, then you basically in barley you've got a cupboard full of sugar behind a locked door.
Correct.
And when we bring it to you, you basically open the door so that we can get the bags of sugar out. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, and a little bit of amino acid as well, just to balance things off nicely. So that is what it's all about. That is the process, and that's how we can run the process with just water, fresh air, and a bit of heat and power.
So just to really sum up, guys, then, so we've got this source now of sugar, ready available for fermenting, and obviously we go on to make our whiskey from that. So Tom's crop today could end up in a bottle in 2 or 3 years' time potentially, you know, and so it's a real life cycle of field to bottle.
Absolutely,
yeah. So it's really interesting. And just while we're on, you know, and I've been sipping away.
Have you?
Catching up. You've been doing the talking. I've done the sipping. So obviously it's our open day, it's our virtual open day, and this bottling's been done specially for that. So this is Yorkshire Day 21, and it's been fantastically crafted by Joe again. You know, we've got bourbon and Oloroso sherry going on in there. It's incredible. I really enjoy it. I hope you do.
That's absolutely amazing.
It's a great whiskey. So
I love it. It's really good.
Yeah. So
is it a bit stronger than normal?
It's 55%. Yeah.
So
it's not quite cask strength. But it's a little bit higher than our normal bottling strength.
I just put the spirit of Yorkshire.
Nice branding, Tom. No, I really hope you enjoyed this session, guys. You know, and thanks to Tim for coming down and explaining everything about malt. You know, to be a single malt distillery and call it malt, it has to be 100% malted barley. So, thanks for supplying 100% malted barley, Tom.
Pleasure. My pleasure, Dave.
Thanks, and I hope to see you in the next session, guys.
Cheers.
Okay. Cheers.